we're good to go. So, and Andrea's on Pacific time, Amy's on Eastern time, Joe's on Eastern time. So we don't have any Central folks on the call this time. That's okay. We got coast to coast covered, so we're good.
Yeah.
Coast.
So 11 a.m. morning for some of us, afternoon for others. So we're good. We got things covered.
Andrea, that's a beautiful view outside your window there. That's Los Angeles, isn't it?
It is. I'm in LA. Yes.
Yeah, very beautiful.
Thanks.
Yes, you can tell it's LA because you can't really see the mountains. There are mountains behind her, but you can't see it because that's called smog. But not that I'm picking on you.
Yeah, well, today is not a very clear day here in LA.
It's been in the 90s every day, right?
Very hot. It's been very hot.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Absolutely.
We have been hot, but now we actually get a couple days in the 70s here, so it's been really nice.
Yeah, you may see a helicopter too during our call, flying by in a high rise. So.
Got it. They're looking for you. Okay, so it's 1 minute after the hour, and I think we're going to get started. We've got more, as I keep looking at the count, more the participant count, more people keep calling in, but we're going to get started. And if you're on the Pacific time, good morning. If you're on Central time, good afternoon. And my East Coast folks, good afternoon. Also, welcome to New Strategies, Georgetown University's program for nonprofit organizations, working on revenue. Today's webinar is Maximizing Social Media for Revenue Generation. We have 3 wonderful participants joining to drop some knowledge and answer your questions and tell us their wise words of wisdom on what works, what doesn't work, and we're still trying to figure it out. First and foremost, I want to thank our 3 funders for this social media for this our webinar series: General Mills, Nike, and Wells Fargo. All 3 of them are long-term supporters of New Strategies, and they specifically are supporting this webinar also to broaden the knowledge. Logistics. If you have questions as we go through, and you will have questions, I'm quite sure, because we have answers. Click on the Q&A button at the very bottom, and we will hopefully get as many questions answered as possible. This webinar will be recorded. It will be recorded and posted on our LinkedIn site. At the end of this presentation, you will see the location for our LinkedIn site, so you can join our LinkedIn site where we have candid and pithy conversations with each other. It's closed, it's not open to the public, so you have to be welcomed in. And as well, all of our speakers, our panelists, have agreed to answer any questions offline also. So if you're too embarrassed to answer your question on Ask a Question here, they'll talk to you later and say, yeah, that's a stupid question, but here's how we would do it. Now, that's it. Let's jump in. I'm going to introduce all 3 of our panelists, and then they're going to go one after the other. They're going to give us a little conversation. We're going to talk with each other. Then we're going to open it up for questions. So first and foremost, as in our last webinar, I know these people, so these aren't strangers to me. These organizations aren't strange. It's a little bit incestuous how we operate here at New Strategies, but that's okay. I get around. So first and foremost, we have Andrea Bazan. So Andrea is the Chief Development Officer at Afterschool Allstars, a phenomenal organization that works with families, providing a myriad of wraparound services for kids' sports, academics, arts, in various locations across the country. She will tell you that story. I actually met Andrea a long time ago when she was with a different nonprofit organization, and I was with a different organization. I was with Target, and we built a Kaboom playground at the organization where she was working before. So she and I bonded over mulch, and we have lots of stories to talk about concrete and mulch and all that kind of good things. So welcome, Andrea. Next, we have, speaking of Kaboom Playgrounds, we have Amy Levner. And Andrea, by the way, is in California. Amy Levner is on the East Coast, is in DC. She's the Vice President of Communications and Marketing at Kaboom. Also has a long history with those of us at Georgetown and New Strategies. Prior to Kaboom, she was at AARP. And Amy is fresh off of vacation, so she is revved up and ready to go with this conversation today. Third, we have Joe Waters. Joe is the founder of Selfish Giving and a frequent blogger, presenter, webinar presenter, and part of the New Strategies team, where he presents on cause marketing, social media, and all things fun at our New Strategy symposiums and forums. So that said, we're going to jump in right now. I'm going to turn it over to Andrea. After Andrea, we're going to go to Amy and then Joe. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you.
Tell us about how you make money via social media, and tell us about Afterschool Allstars.
Great. Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to be here. Thank you, Bernard, for inviting me. And it is great to spend a little time talking about money, which is all I think about every day, all the time. Even when I'm sleeping, I'm dreaming about money, especially now during the time that we're all facing. So who we are, Afterschool Allstars is an organization that's about 30 years old. We are based out of LA. We also have headquarters in Washington, DC. So it's good to be bi-coastal. And we operate in 13 states. We have in about 60 cities. We have about 19 chapters. We don't have buildings. We actually operate in the schools, and we serve about 90,000 students. Our vision is for our All-Stars to be safe and healthy, which is quite a mission nowadays, for them to go on to college, and then to be happy adults, and then to give back to their communities. Our focus is on the middle schools. We were founded by Arnold Schwarzenegger about 30 years ago, like I said. And our mission is unique in that we focus on the middle school space, but we also serve high school and younger where the need arises. So that's our mission. So traditional fundraising, I've been in fundraising or a CEO of nonprofits for most of my career. I did some political work as well. And when Bernard asked us to speak, he said, how do you make money through social media? And so I was thinking about how do I kind of share some of the kind of bumps on the road that we've had. And so I started kind of thinking about just the fiscal year that we just ended. Our fiscal year goes July 1st through June 30th. So I picked Giving Tuesday and End of Year campaign, because those are two campaigns that we did largely through social media or through online giving. So our Giving Tuesday campaign, you know, as a nonprofit, a national nonprofit, we felt we had to do Giving Tuesday. You know, we go back and forth every year about Giving Tuesday. So this past Giving Tuesday, just to give you an idea, we did a Giving Tuesday campaign through Facebook. Our Giving Tuesday campaign, you know, we planned it, we met about it, we talked about it. We made about $36,000, and that included a $20,000 gift. So, you know, I am not a fan of Giving Tuesday. We may have Giving Tuesday, you know, great stories around the call here, but that was our Giving Tuesday, you know, through Facebook. End of year campaign this year, we actually did it differently. We picked a student named Emma, beautiful girl in one of our schools actually here in LA. And we decided to do it a little bit differently. We said, let's, instead of doing like the usual posts for end of year, let's follow Emma in a day of everything she does around the services that we provide. So we had Emma a day at a school, we had Emma with her parents, we had Emma with the mentors that we provide, we had Emma doing you know, nutrition classes, all of the things that Afterschool Allstars provides. And we had a beautiful photographs of Emma, quotes from Emma. We had Emma on Twitter. We had Emma on Facebook. We even had Emma on LinkedIn. Beautiful campaign. And it ran through mid-October, from mid-October till about the end of December. And then it ended with a post from our CEO, Ben Paul, and Emma actually doing like a high five. Beautiful campaign. That campaign netted about $70,000, I believe. And it was a beautiful campaign, and we were pleased with it. And that was all great. And then COVID in March. The schools closed. That's where we were operating. And we usually relied on an in-person event at our founder's house, Arnold's house, that netted quite a lot of revenue for us. We also depended on funding in some of our chapters, 21st century funding. So it was quite a very difficult time for us, as for many of you all, I'm sure, in the nonprofit sector, but more of a difficult time for our families and our students. And so we had to really kind of huddle as an executive team and figure out what we were going to do with this large nonprofit organization serving thousands of kids and families. And so we very quickly decided that everything was going to have to be virtual. Everything was going to have to be online. And as someone that was overseeing a fundraising and marketing team, which is what I do at Afterschool Allstars, we had to really then reduce our staff at the national level. Our national team went from 56 to 22. My entire marketing team was laid off. And my development team was largely also let go as well. We kept about 4 people in development from the large team that I had built in the time that I'd been at Afterschool Allstars. And we decided to focus our efforts on the chapter level and the community. Our goals were to sustain the organization and to really focus on the community. So that was COVID in March. Followed by the killing of George Floyd. Our organization really pivoted very quickly. We realized that our families needed us more than ever. Our mission really had focused on the students and in the schools. And we very quickly realized that we could not just focus on the students, we needed to expand it to focus on families, expand it to focus on the community, and really be upfront about who we were serving, which are Black and brown kids. And I can tell you, and I can talk more later on another time, that we have never done more innovative work than what we're doing now. And we had never been more of a tight organization than we are now, even though we're much smaller. I think we're doing very relevant work. Cause Marketing, as an organization that's based in LA with a board that we have a very good board. We have a board that has a lot of team owners. We have a board that has entertainment industry folks. The board became very engaged. It's always been very engaged, but particularly because of COVID, we've always been very engaged. We work with Omaze, we work with Charity Bus. You may be familiar with these 2 companies. Omaze ran a campaign for us during COVID where we raffled off a Tesla. That campaign was very successful for us. We had different thoughts about doing something like that in terms of optics, but that campaign netted about $200,000 for us. And then this event that we postponed at Arnold's house, we decided to, instead of postponing it, to actually not do it at all. We still had some of the donors give some money. So instead of the $3-4 million, we received about $400,000 from that. And those of you that may know or may follow some of this online, our founder, Arnold, also became very engaged. Arnold has a pony, and Arnold also has a donkey that in his house that became somewhat of social media stars, Lulu and Whiskey. And so with the whole kind of stay home, message, we decided to do a campaign around that. So Lulu and Whiskey became kind of these social media stars. And then we decided to do these sweatshirts with Lulu and Whiskey, which are like right here. The sweatshirts say, "Don't be an ass, stay inside." The sweatshirts have done really well. We also now have these "We'll Be Back" shirts. You can see one here. Of course, with a small team that we couldn't do the fulfillment, we couldn't handle any of those things. And so Represent.com, which is a company that Arnold works for, is doing all of the handling of that. And this was something that Arnold promoted in his platform, in his social media channels, and we're extremely grateful. But it also allowed us to get the message across of what our organization was doing, which is really trying to bring attention to what our families were going through. The Lulu and Whiskey campaign and the We'll Be Back campaign, which is shirts, sweatshirts, but also masks, are doing really well. It's already brought in over $250,000. So those things have been really well. And I think the message for me was that we just couldn't do it alone. Our team could not do it alone, and we had to really expand our reach, really try to activate our board, and try to do as much as we can in partnership with others. Our online All-Star News, which, had been, out every month or so. It was, full of stories. We planned the stories forever. We said, we've got to send this every 2 weeks. And so we said 2 stories every 2 weeks, lots of visuals, pictures of what our families are going through. And so we started sending the All-Star News, which actually we even changed the name to All-Star News instead of Afterschool Allstars. We started sending that every 2 weeks. Simple 2 stories, very brief, and we've seen a tremendous increase in online giving. I can give you some numbers. Year-to-year increase in online giving has been 200% from last year. And then Q3 to Q4 increase this year alone, this last fiscal year, has been 423%. And this is without someone that's focusing on individual giving in our organization. So our social media channels, Bernard asked me to talk about that, and that's my last kind of point I want to make, is that we're active in all. We have Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. We try to have a personality for each of the channels, and we try to, be as active as possible. We started really focusing on the food distribution. One of our board members, again, with this whole thing about we're all in this together, we can't do it alone, heads Applegate, the turkey company, and he then started doing some social media outreach. Another board member then started a role at TikTok, Michael Beckerman. TikTok approached us fairly early on, and we had one conversation. It was a Zoom call, very much like this, with some TikTok folks, a couple of board members. Through that phone call emerged a $3 million gift that TikTok put on the table. The gift went most out the door through food distribution to our families. We had to build the infrastructure for that fairly quickly. But through the TikTok gift also emerged our Songwriting Academy, which is in full-fledged force as we speak right now. We're in the 3rd week of the Songwriting Academy right now with our students. The Songwriting Academy has allowed us to really go full-fledged into the TikTok platform. In 3 weeks, we built a huge audience in TikTok. I have TikTok on my phone. My daughters, make all kinds of fun of me about that now. We yesterday had a TikTok event with a couple of the artists that are helping us, Melanie Martinez. We had almost 500,000 views for the hour, and we now have about 16,000 followers on TikTok, and I can talk more about monetizing that and how we're really thinking through that. So again, I think the point is that pivoting, being nimble, really focusing on what the community's needs are. We're now really preparing for the whole back to school, the virtual versus in person, and really now reaching out to new folks that have found us through TikTok, that have found us, through some of our social media outreach to try and get protective gear for our staff. It's been a lot of work. I think that, we still have a lot more work to do. But I think that reaching out to everyone that has been lending a hand has been the way that we're moving forward.
That is fantastic. Thank you, Andrea. The pain and the difficulty that Afterschool Allstars went through earlier this year in basically chopping your staff in more than in half, the majority, if not all, of our partners totally can relate to that and understand. Pivoting to address the needs and being laser focused is also something that so many of them can understand. A couple of takeaways before we turn it over to Amy. Afterschool Allstars leans heavily on their board. You always have, but in this particular situation, you've even doubled down on your board. And of course, the founder. There were times that Arnold was not, I'm familiar with the organization, so I know Arnold was not as engaged the past couple of years. Early on, he was extremely engaged. Then he backed away a bit. He was governor. And, knowing that the need was there, stepped up. I've actually seen some of the videos of Lulu and whiskey in his kitchen. And a lot of our partners can't relate to that. They don't have a superstar founder or a board of execs. But one of the things you highlighted that all of our partners can, and that is the frequency. You double down and changed your communication. I love this stat that your frequency, you made sure it went out every 2 weeks. You made sure it was brief. It was focused on individual givers, and you've increased over 400% quarter to quarter from individual giving just based on that newsletter. That is phenomenal. Everyone can build on that. So we'll get back. I'm sure there's questions on that. Amy, so Kaboom also had to do a bit of a pivot also based on the reality. And I know you guys are still working through, the organization is still working through all of that, but you also rely heavily on social media. Let's turn it over to you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Bernard. And that was, I think what's going to be so interesting is that, I'm actually not sharing my screen. I think what's going to be so interesting is that Kaboom takes a real different tack and approach to social media, because we have we rely on a small percentage of our revenue from individual givers. And so we require our social media to be a workhorse for us to both do some driving of conversation, but overall support our entire partnership engagement strategy. So it's really critical for us to have a strong social media presence across channels so that we can have deep individual conversations with key influencers and partners. So let me take a step back. Kaboom is a national nonprofit. We have been around for over almost 25 years now. And we work side by side with communities to bring play spaces to local communities. And a couple years ago, we looked around and we were actually building our 3,000th play space and celebrating it. We were doing it in Congress Heights, the Congress Heights neighborhood of DC, where we had built our first play space. And we looked at the community, and in the 20 plus years since we built that first play space up to the 3,000th, not much has changed. And we thought, my gosh, we've reached millions of kids. We've worked with thousands of communities across the country. And what are we doing to help contribute to the fact that this disinvestment is continuing? So what is our role, and what does our organization need to do more and to get to scale? And so that led to both a 2-year plus year really deep dive journey. We've always been focused on equity. We've always been focused on bringing play spaces and play to kids who have not traditionally gotten access to that. But we really thought, my gosh, we have got to be much more explicit about this. We've got to be much more focused and talk about our work as a cause. And now, fast forward a bit, we launched a brand right before COVID. The logo that you see behind me is brand new as of the end of February. And, we were actually really thrilled that we were able to get it out before COVID hit, because our cause is ensuring that kids have equitable access to play spaces. And this is an equity issue. If you think about what is happening in my backyard, I live in Maryland, right outside of DC. And Maryland school funding is distributed based on population. And so Baltimore City Public Schools get about the same amount of funding based on population as Anne Arundel County Public Schools. Yet Anne Arundel County Public Schools, which is in the suburbs, largely white, largely much wealthier than the Baltimore City Public Schools, has millions and millions more dollars of funding than Baltimore City Public Schools does. And what kind of condition do you think their play spaces are in, right? And so we've got to, and you can, multiply that situation time and again across the country and every school system nationwide, whether it's urban, rural, suburban, what have you. And so we are focused now on the movement of ensuring that kids have great access to play spaces. And frankly, this goes back to before the times of the civil rights movement, but during the civil rights movement, there were students at Howard University who were fighting for equal access to Glen Echo Park, which is also not too far from me. So this is a part of a long history of making sure that public space is space where kids and families can belong. And that is incredibly important to us. And we feel like we're carrying the mantle of that. And, in some ways we've been really fortunate because at first we thought, oh my gosh, COVID hits. So we launched this new brand, COVID hits, we're in the midst of a public health crisis. And we're thinking, okay, well, like Andrea and team were thinking, okay, we need to pivot, talk about childhood health and what it means for kids who are cooped up at home and not getting access to the play that they need. And then George Floyd was murdered and it was clear, oh no, we are back to focusing on, rightly so, this major civil rights movement that we're a part of right now. And COVID's a slice of place-based equity is a slice of that, public space is a slice of that. And so for us, the way we use social media is to ensure that we can have conversations with individuals about the work that we do. The funding that we do on our play spaces, or the funding needed to do the work that we do, is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so we rely on partnerships with foundations, with nonprofits, with city governments, with corporate partners to provide those play spaces for us. They are looking though to us, to our presence, to the thought leadership that we have in the space. They're looking to join hands with an organization that they can believe in and that they can trust. And what we found when we launched our brand, our daily impressions were, somewhere in the space of 30 to 60,000, right? That's the daily average for the kinds of impressions for the work that we get. When we launched our brand, we yielded 364,000 impressions. And this place-based equity idea is really resonating with people. And so we are leaning into leveraging social to drive our cause. And so one of the other successes that we've had recently, and I certainly am happy to talk about the failures that we've had too, this is still a learning process, but one of the successes we had recently with one of our funding partners, CarMax, is they are interested in being known as an innovative company. And so, a lot of people think CarMax cars, is it really high tech and innovative? Incredibly high tech and innovative. And so they supported a program of ours that focused on STEM learning and STEAM learning. And so we use social to bolster the giving that they did. We had this beautiful launch at the DC Children's Museum earlier this winter, earlier this year, and use social media to underlie and tell the story of the way and demonstrate how CarMax is investing in innovation for the communities that they serve, for the kids that they serve, because they're a company that believes in innovation. And that is going to lead to stronger partnerships and relationships now, where today we can call CarMax and say, hey, we just launched new guidelines at Kaboom on reopening play spaces across the country as communities start to open. And CarMax has jumping in with us and saying, hey, let us divert some of the funds that we had originally put towards building new play spaces with you to help reopen play spaces in places that need them most. And that allowed, our social media presence allowed that kind of conversation to happen. The last point I'll make before I turn it over back to Bernard and Joe is that for you all, one of the things we do as a national nonprofit is we lean into our partners and our partners' resources to bolster our social media. So oftentimes the partners we work with have larger budgets than we do. They have agencies at their disposal. They have paid social or paid advertising at their disposal that they can then give to us to use to promote our program. So we have done that several times before as well. Most recently, we have a relationship with the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation, and we're launching a Play Everywhere program in Western New York with them. Play Everywhere is bringing play to everyday spaces, city streets, and what have you. And their agency, the Martin Agency, is working on our half to promote that activity. which is tremendously helpful for us because then we don't have to spend, the minuscule budgets we have, particularly in this time of COVID, right? Where all of us are trying to upend the couch cushions to find every penny we can. It's hugely helpful to have our partners step in that way.
Perfect. Thank you, Amy. Three things that you said that really resonated, and I think they tie into what Andrea said, but I know things that Joe talks about frequently on his own webinars and blog. Number one, using social media to drive your cause, because first and foremost, your organization exists for a cause. Secondly, you highlight your partners, organizations that your organization already works with. And then third, maybe the most important, is maximizing those partner relationships. Quite often as nonprofits, we think we need the money from the nonprofit, from the corporation, we need the money from our partners. Sometimes they have other resources other than money to give. In the case of that you just brought up, they're experts in maximizing marketing and social media. So rather than go for that check, maybe we should be going for that partnership and getting some of the resources they already have. That's huge, 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 especially since your resources, Andrea's resources, all 100 people on this call, their resources are minuscule. So that said, Joe, I'm going to put it in your court.
Great. Hey, thank you very much. Welcome everyone, and thanks for having me today. And thanks to the two other presenters. I mean, just two fabulous presentations. What I really wanted to come in and add here, and I'm actually going to share a couple slides at this point so that we can talk about a couple things. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to take a step back a little bit, because what you have just heard is the workings of two advanced players, right, in social media, in terms of how they do things, in terms of how they approach things. And one of the things I was especially impressed by both organizations, Bernard, was just how much they leaned onto existing assets they already had. Andrea's case with influencers, just a really powerful way of doing things, and we're learning more about that. And Amy, just you leaning on your partners and your board, those things are so important. But I know too, speaking to people today, that a lot of people just don't have that, right? This is kind of an ideal when we look at Andrea and Amy and what they have. How do we get to that point? How do we get started with social media? And one of the things that I talk a lot about this, and I certainly talk about it at the Georgetown program, is really developing your keystone content asset for social media, okay? So what I believe you all should be doing is focusing on one thing to start. All right. Most of you cannot do 2, 3, 4 channels effectively. You have to do one. Now, if this was back in 2008, when we could put just about anything on Twitter and get 100 likes on it, that would be different. But it's not that way anymore. We are awash in content. And quality is so important these days, folks, that you need to choose one thing to really focus on. And what I suggest that people do with that one thing is that you really think about who you want to target with your social media. All right. So when you're thinking about, and Andrea and Amy can certainly talk more about this, in the conversation. But when you're thinking about social media, what do you want to accomplish? Who do you want to target? That's a very important question. And that will help you choose the correct social media channel. Are you looking at Gen Z? Are you looking at family foundations? Where can you find conservative men? Where can you find B2C businesses? Where can you find hippo lovers? There's a great example of the Cincinnati Zoo, how they've done an incredible job. They're promoting their local hippo and using that as a promotion tool for the whole zoo itself. Right? So you really want to be thinking about one channel and one audience. And for those small organizations on the line today, one of the things that I want to emphasize to you is that most of you are only going to be able to do one thing effectively. So you're going to probably have to go a little bit broader with your audience, but hopefully as a small organization, you're niching down enough in your impact so you are hyper-targeted on a specific audience. So when we look at this, and I think of a couple examples on this front, Bernard, that I wanted to mention to folks, one of my favorite examples is the New York Public Library. And of course, the New York Public Library, they have lots of assets, they have lots of audiences, but one audience that they've really wanted to do a better job focusing on were young people. They wanted to reach out more to young people. So they knew that young people liked to read, and they know that young people liked Instagram. So they came up with Insta novels, and they grew their Instagram following by over 100% in terms of growing the types of people. And now they're looking at ways that they can monetize that audience, right? And work with, whether it be individuals, working with companies to raise money from that. You know, another favorite example of mine, and this is certainly on a much more traditional channel, is we have the American Childhood Cancer Organization. Just a great example of someone who focused on one channel, in this case, Facebook. They built a huge following on Facebook, 146,000 people. But Bernard, you know what I was really impressed by these people is they just didn't have a lot of people on Facebook. They were actually getting a lot of engagement from people, right? You go to their posts, and in some instances, they have hundreds of likes, hundreds of comments, hundreds of shares to share with people. And a few years ago, they worked with a company in Virginia called Custom Ink, a t-shirt company, to get t-shirts in the hands of people in that audience. And in the first quarter of that year, they sold like $100,000, $150,000, I think it was, of t-shirt sales in terms of promoting that. And they did that through their Facebook page. So the idea here is by focusing on one medium, by getting really good at attracting one specific audience and growing that audience to the point that you have an engaged audience, you can certainly raise money from that. But there's a challenge with social media, and I'd love to hear people talk about this. I tend to be, and Bernard knows this, I'm a belt and suspended kind of guy, right, Bernard? I mean, when you think of Joe, he's not taking any chances here.
True.
And one of the things yeah, it's true, right? So one of the things that I really think is important is that all of us need to be belt and suspended when it comes to social media, because we know there are a lot of variability with these platforms, right? They change their algorithms, politics change, things change, right? So one of the things that I want to emphasize, regardless of what social media channel you come away from today, is that you focus on getting those people back to the original social media, which is email. All right, because when you have someone's email, you have the most powerful, valuable thing to your organization. You have a one-to-one relationship with that person. So while it's great to get Facebook likes, while it's great to get Twitter subscribers, while it's great to get followers on whatever platform, the truth is the most valuable and best thing you can have is someone's email. So regardless of which platform that you're working on, and the commenters here today, commentators can talk about how to get those people to your platform over to email. It's definitely the place to be. And I always use myself as an example, as you know, on selfish giving in terms of what I do. And, you know, I'm a good example of this. I'm a solopreneur. I do consulting in this area, but I only focus on two things. I focus on email and I focus on Twitter. And you'll notice that on my Twitter profile here in the upper left-hand corner, I've got something that says, sign up for my cause marketing newsletter, right? Because I'm trying to get across to people that even though we're engaging with each other on Twitter, I'd really rather have you as an email subscriber. And when you go to my site, whether you're looking on the sidebar, whether you're arriving at the site for the first time, or whether you're reading a post, you're always getting some type of message about signing up for the newsletter. So one of the things that I would emphasize with all of you is whatever you come away from today in terms of what platform you need to be focused on, think about the audience you want to target, build an audience on that platform, but make sure that you secure that audience on email. And the best way to do that is through the social media platform itself, and then also having various pop-ups, various sign-up tools on your website so that people are engaged. So that's my take on this, Bernard. So I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Joe. Some
Sure.
really good salient points and things that I know that in individual conversations earlier with Andre and Amy, email was two things that they both highlighted. I'm like, yeah, email's great, it's great, but everybody knows that. But thank you, Joe, because not everybody does know that. So that's a really good point.
Yep.
Questions are coming through. So reminding everyone, send your questions in. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to it later so that you can review it over and over and over again, and it will be saved on our LinkedIn profile. So a couple of questions already. Andrea, you talked about personality with your social media posts. Can you talk a little bit about the difference? And a question for both Andrea and Amy. Part two is, knowing what you know now, based on where you currently are, your organization, and where you both come from multiple different organizations. If you had to start with one social media platform, Joe said pick one. So there's a lot of folks on here who aren't even active on social media, and if they are, they have a social media presence, but they post once a year or whatever. If you had to pick one, what would you pick and why? So Andrea, I'm going to start with you with talk a little bit about personality, and then where would you start if you're counseling someone on starting?
Great question, and great presentations, Amy and Joe. I think it built up really nicely. So I think, I think it depends on the age of the audience and also the message you're trying to get out. And I think also it really depends on what we're all going through right now as a country. And definitely, I think a lot of the playbook for fundraising has really gone out the window. I think traditional fundraising in many ways is being kind of turned upside down. I think all of us, I think Amy, you made really great points about our civil rights, movement now and the urgency of it. I think all of us as nonprofit leaders have a real duty to speak out in all of the different ways in which we are coming at it from our missions of the nonprofits that we all are passionately involved in. Facebook is largely an older audience, but the given aspect of Facebook, I think, is more formalized than in other platforms. I think LinkedIn is, more of a professional, a platform. I would say Facebook is probably a good place to start for a nonprofit. It probably has easier tools. I think for us, TikTok, there's not a lot of nonprofit activity in TikTok now. It's a controversial, platform, if you will. We've gotten to know the folks at TikTok. They have, a real passion for what's happening. The kids are really involved. So for us, TikTok has become something that's very, we're passionate about. Our kids have gotten a lot out of our songwriting academy. So I'm glad to talk to anyone about TikTok. So that's kind of where we are. In terms of personality, again, we're looking at the age of the audience, the message, and how risky we can be. We're really being risky right now. We're really pushing the envelope in terms of our message and how loud we're being about how our community is being affected. So that's kind of what I would say.
Thank you. Amy?
Yeah, to build on that, I mean, I love what you're saying, Andrea and Joe. You said this really well too. Know your audience, because that's going to drive which platform you choose. And for us, we're actually in the midst of this right now. We certainly do not have it all figured out. For such a large national nonprofit as we are, relatively, we're a fairly unknown national brand, and we have aspirations down the road to become a much more well-known national brand and really bolster and build up our individual giving. Yet right now, for us, to be honest, the best platform for us is LinkedIn. If I had marketing budget, I would spend it 100% on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is going to get us to the individual conversations with city leaders, the individual conversations with program officers and foundations, with corporate CSR folks that are going to get us the funding that we need, right? And get them to be a part of the projects. And so we do a lot of paid work on LinkedIn, and then use Twitter and Facebook to do earned media. So, promoting others' posts, doing what we can to promote the projects that we're doing in community, using Facebook to highlight the playground projects that we're putting into place and the kids that we're working with, using Twitter to highlight some of the influencers we're working with and some of the issues that we care about, and then focusing on LinkedIn to build in some of those key one-on-one relationships.
Love that, love that, love that. Know your audience, that's what it goes down to. Now, going back to, we have a question about email, and which I kind of threw away, but both Amy and Andrea were like, okay, and then Joe's like, no, let's talk about email. So that said, nonprofit we don't have a huge database for email. How do we get there? Joe, I'll start with you, then backwards, Amy, then Andrea. Thoughts on providing guidance? How do we build an email database?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing is first of all, anytime that you get a donor to your organization, right? Name, address, phone number, where do you work, and what's your email address, right? I mean, it should be the number one thing that you communicate with people about. It should be the number one thing that, I mean, think about it. Think about how important it is to have someone's email address and how valuable that can be. But you know what I think it is too, Bernard, Amy, and Andrea, is so often it's about just being on all the time about that you have an email newsletter or you send out regular emails, and that is the best way to connect with your organization. I mean, the first thing that I tell people after I meet them is I have a newsletter, right? And so they associate that with me. And I think nonprofits need to be much more centric on like, hey, I'd love to connect with you. And, you know, this could apply to the other platforms too, but I think like the gold standard is getting someone's email. Like, hey, I'd love to be able to send you my email newsletter. Could I sign you up for my newsletter? And get permission from people. Just don't throw people on your list, which we see all the time, but get permission from those people, or better yet, have them go themselves and actually do it. So yeah, I just think like being on all the time and figuring out every way, like how is that, you know, how are those, all the different ways that you can collect people's email addresses and using even, you know, on your other platforms, getting people over to those types of things. But the biggest thing too is when we get donors to our organization, we collect their emails.
Anything to add, Andrea, Amy?
Well, the one thing I would add to that, I agree with Joe, what Joe said, and that's our biggest challenge, honestly, is gathering email addresses and collecting them. The other challenge that I would recommend everyone focus on is keeping them, retaining them, because you want, and you do that via good, relevant content. But I think what a lot of nonprofits do is they get email addresses and then they're just bombarding people with fundraising asks. And you know, for us, we found that the stories, you know, Andrea, you mentioned following that one student around.
Emma, yay, we love Emma.
Yes, Emma, right. The stories of impact are really what our audience seems to respond to. And the newsletters about some of the successes we've had or what kinds of activities we've been up to or where we are have helped us retain the audience in a much better way, our email list in a much better way than had we just used it simply for fundraising. I think you got to also focus on content and the quality content.
I mean, one thing I would add, I feel like I'm an evangelist for this. You know, we use Salesforce, and one thing we say is like, if it's not in Salesforce, it just doesn't it doesn't exist. And we're constantly hounding everyone in our other departments. Please give us your emails. You know, who did you meet? Give us your cards. I mean, we used to do little campaigns. We used to do little contests, you know, among departments, you know, who's going to like give us more contacts. And now, you know, I think with what we're going through, we're just saying, just forward us the emails of who you met, forward us the emails of who you, you know, are working with. I think it's the responsibility of, you know, whoever's, you know, in charge of marketing or fundraising in your organization to really just gather all the contacts of anybody in your organization is talking to, and then enter them into your database. A database has to constantly be fed and cleaned up. Is like the care and feeding is what I call it of your database is number one. I think Joe made a really good points about your database. That is like the core of your outreach. And from there is where you really kind of start all of your programs in terms of donor relations, especially now where everything is virtual. So I think you cannot underestimate you know, the effort that it goes into really knowing your database, how it works, keeping it cleaned up, and really keeping your donors well informed. Not too much, like Amy said, but just enough.
Yeah.
So here's a question that makes me smile. It's related to Andrea's point earlier on the refresh, the redo of your communications, but it also directly ties into something that Joe talks about at New Strategies on his blogs. The question is, I'm just going to read the question. Would you rather have consistent or regular communication that may sometimes be lacking in actionable content, or irregularly scheduled communications that is full of quality content and CTAs? Joe, I'm going to go to you first because I know you have an answer to this, and then I'm going to go to Andrea.
Well, I think the interesting thing about something like that is, first of all, I do think quality is, is the most important thing, right? But I think where people lose sight of the opportunity with social media and email and other forms of communication is consistency. Is that consistency is not as important as quality, but I will tell you that consistency is definitely a close second place, right? Like in the sense, like, I think the winners out there with something like this is someone who show up with an appointment every week with their audience. And they say, at 8 a.m. on Wednesday morning, I have an appointment with my audience where I talk about something that they're interested in, not something I'm interested in, something that they're interested in. So I think, the consistency piece is really important. And in the beginning, when people are creating this stuff, I tell them, hit the damn button. Hit the send button, right? Because you just have to develop the consistency and the quality will come. And if you lose some people in the beginning, they'll come back because of the quality that evolves over time. So consistency is huge.
I would agree with Joe. So I don't really have anything more to add to his points. One thing I would add that perhaps we haven't mentioned is one person that we did bring into our marketing team is a graphic designer. And extremely talented. She's someone I worked with before in Chicago. And that's something that we really, very quickly realized that, it's like the very quick attention that people have that just, something that needs to grab you very quickly. And so for our All-Star News that I mentioned before, the look of it, had to really grab people, the pictures, the images, even the header. And so I would suggest, if you bring somebody on board or really just ask anyone that may have that talent around your network or your sphere of partners or volunteers, I think that's a really important skill to have in your toolbox. It's graphic design to whatever you push out, make sure that it looks somewhat, not just, that calls attention to what you're trying to say. I think graphic design is something that sometimes we overlook and we maybe put too much attention on the words and not enough in like, is this something that somebody's going to click through? Put links on your stuff, that donate button, all those things are really important, I think, especially now.
Yeah.
Amy, anything to add? Go ahead, Amy.
I think the second most popular or most important tool, critical tool behind Salesforce or your whatever your database, it can be an Excel spreadsheet too, that's totally fine, is your editorial calendar. Because to Joe's point, that can help with both consistency and quality, because oftentimes you can plan your content ahead. You can look ahead. So for us, for example, we can look ahead and say, oh, X date is Mr. Rogers' birthday. He was all about, kids and families. Well, how are we going to celebrate his birthday? Oh, today would have been Tamir Rice's 25th birthday or 18th birthday. He was shot on the 25th. His 18th birthday. And, what are we going to say about that? And you can plan ahead and get your content to a point that it's really high quality and get it ready to go. And then get to what Joe was saying about having that cadence, having that consistent cadence. There's a lot you can do ahead. And if you have that plan ahead, then it also allows you to be able to move things around when you do need to be opportunistic, when things do happen and you have to respond quickly. So our editorial calendars is just incredibly valuable to us.
Okay, Amy, on to that point, on an editorial calendar and a cadence, I'm going to point this one at you because communications is in your job title, but also Andrea and Joe, you're going to have some input if it's different than Amy. The question is it possible to over communicate? Early on in this pandemic, we saw a lot of questions coming through, a lot of interest, but then lately we've seen some unsubscribes. Are we over communicating? So from a cadence perspective, talk to us.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful question. And from what I've seen, I think it's less about the over communicating. And again, I feel like a broken record. It's about what you're communicating. Think about what brands did in the wake of the social movements that were hitting the streets, earlier last month. There were some brands that were incredibly authentic and did it really well. Actually, Bernard, Target was one of the best, I think, because they put out a letter and said, don't worry about us. Don't worry about Minneapolis. We're focused on our employees. Don't worry about our stores. we need to do better. Let's all do better for, for our country. And that was wonderful as compared to some others that were just seemingly getting on the bandwagon. And I think nonprofits can fall into this trap too, as long as you stay true to, feel like you have something important to say. Don't say something just to say it. Amplify others. The way we get around that communications trap is that we amplify, or that over communications trap is we amplify organizations we believe in. And so, we will share others' messages that could help, support our strategy. And then finally, just make sure it's really authentic. Make sure it's really true to your organization's values and true to what you're trying to accomplish. That you're not just communicating for communication's sake, because people are smart. We can all see right through it.
I've got the 5-minute warning. Joe, Andrea, anything to add to what Amy just gave us, which was wonderful, importance of relevancy.
I think, it's, in a lot of instances, the value isn't just there. I actually think a lot of nonprofits under-communicate with their audience, that their audience would like to hear more valuable things for them. It's like, you talk to a nonprofit and they're like, well, we send out a newsletter once a quarter, and you say, well, why not do it once a month or every other week? And they're like, wow, that's a lot of stuff. And I'm saying, if you can't figure out something good or interesting or valuable to say about your organization every other week, you're gonna wonder why you're in business. Right? So, that's something that's really important, is that we always have to communicate with value. And we do that when we think about our audience first and not thinking about what we want to get out there, but what they want to hear. What they want to hear is impact.
Right. And I love Andrea's point earlier on keep it brief. This is not a novel. People don't want something, okay, and then we did this, and then we did this, and then you keep it brief, keep it brief. Okay, so in sense of timing, a couple of things. And I'm just going to throw them out there, and whoever wants to answer them, answer them. This question, and we've heard this at New Strategies also, is our donors don't use social media. How do we get them? It cracks me up. How do you know they don't? So whoever wants to answer that one, that's that one question. Secondly is, this is specific to Andrea, that bi-weekly newsletter and your huge increase in individual giving. This may be something you want to answer offline, I don't know. But how do you do this bi-weekly and how do you increase? I'm assuming you just, going back to Amy's point, a calendar.
We were planning on this for months before the pandemic. The pandemic made us just do it. And I put together a team of 4 people from different departments and say, who wants to help? I'll help. And we basically, like Amy said, we put a calendar that goes out the next 6 months. Every 2 weeks, we're going to do a story. And we're basically doing Q&A with an executive director, a Q&A with a funder. We're doing a story with a picture of the food distribution. We're doing, and then if something comes up, we just change it for the next, edition. It's very easy to do if you just like roll up your sleeves and do it. The stories are like very quick. I'm glad to subscribe you to it if you like. But it's easier. It's just like, just do it. And so I think it's been a real pride for the organization because we're all involved in it, I think.
Got it. Joe, speak to our donors don't.
First of all, they do. And they may not be on Snapchat, right? In the sense like, well, our audience isn't on Snapchat. No, but they're probably on Facebook. Right? Or that, they're, even old-fashioned text. I think more nonprofits should be using text when they communicate with people. Yeah. So the point is that yes, they are on social media. My 89-year-old mother is on social media, right? So they're on social media. You just have to find where they're at, and this is where almost in every instance too, where you can fall back to email, because this is what, email is the granddaddy, right? So you can always fall back on the granddaddy on something like that. So when I hear people say that, I say BS. Nope, they're on social media.
Got it.
The other people on social media, sorry, Bernard. The other people on social media are their children, their assistants, their dog walkers, their babysitters, right? And so, and the email is gold.
Got it. Great. Yeah. So I got the 1-minute warning. There are more questions out there, so we can't answer all of them. An interesting one specifically that I think is really interesting, but I'm going to offline ask Andrea to speak to this one, is how do you balance selling product versus providing relevant content that's interesting? Because one of the ways you highlighted in generating revenue was technically selling product. You got your sweatshirts, you got your t-shirts, you got your See Lulu and whiskey. That's technically selling. But I don't care. It's money.
We didn't sell it. We had somebody else sell
it.
And
it's fun. And
Yeah,
it's fun what
exactly.
you're doing.
It's
It's
witty.
interesting.
It's
Yeah,
in the character
yeah,
of the organization.
that's right.
So
I love it.
that said, first and foremost, cognizant of time because I get my hand slapped when we go over time. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Joe, for giving us your time, dropping some knowledge, and helping all of us do better in what we do. Thank you to our 3 sponsors for our webinar, General Mills, Nike, and Wells Fargo. We could not do this without you. Thank you so much. I think you're probably watching this right now and making sure I don't say anything inappropriate. And have a great day. This will be posted online. You'll get an email with this presentation, and it's on our LinkedIn site. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.